benedicere, predicare, laudare, we praise our Lord with our saints, benedicere, we lift our voice in song, predicare, we proclaim your word to the world, laudare, benedicere, predicare. Sent out to preach by Dominic, sent two by two to all the world, sent out to study the gospel of grace, to find new ways to preach. Laudare, benedicere, predicare, laudare, praise the Lord with our saints, benedicere, lift our voice in song, predicare, we proclaim your word to the world, laudare, benedicere,
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this second edition of our YearEnder conversations on human rights. During the first episode, Father Mike Deeb, the outgoing director of our delegation, shared with us some interesting reflections on his stint as permanent delegate of the Dominican Order to the United Nations, and also as director. If you missed it, don't worry. The videos of the talks will be uploaded into our YouTube channel. So for today, first of all, I'd like to invite Father Mike Deeb to say some words of welcome.
Thank you, Monica, and warm greetings to all of you. I'm delighted to be here at this webinar, which has been arranged by our staff in Geneva, in Spain, and everywhere. And it's just before I'm leaving this position, so I'm delighted to be able to greet you all again and to introduce you to our brother Anyedi Okure, who will take over from me. And we today are focusing on the question of environmental justice. We're trying to, which is our priority. It's been a top priority of our delegation for the last few years, in which we are trying to confront issues of environmental destruction and climate change. Now, we chose this priority because we cannot talk about justice and peace without talking about environmental justice alongside human rights. For a long time, in the face of massive human rights violations, few people have considered environmental justice and environmental issues as a priority, including things like caring for the air, caring for water, vegetation, caring for animals. There's been very little focus or concern about that when we're talking about justice and peace normally. But with Pope Francis' encyclical Laudato Si', all of this has now changed. We can no longer exclude environmental justice as an integral element of our search for justice and peace. And Dominicans, in fact, are struggling to face this issue in so many parts of the world. I can list so many in Guatemala, in Peru, Brazil, the United States, Kenya, Cameroon, the Democratic Republic of Congo, South Africa, Vietnam, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, France, Germany, etc. These are just a few where, and in the Philippines, of course, where Dominicans are struggling to face this issue. We can go on and on. And the natural disasters that we are hearing about every day, and which we will hear about again today, reveal that we are already too late to stop the disasters provoked by climate change. Nevertheless, if we humans can start taking environmental destruction seriously, we can try to minimize it and start showing greater compassion for the air, compassion for our water, our trees, and vegetation, compassion for our animals, reflected in our consumption, eating habits, maybe our children will have something to look forward to in the future. So I'm very happy to finish off my mandate with this focus and to hear of this excellent case study of the Philippines. Our brothers and sisters have been collaborating so closely with our delegation to the UN for the past years. So I hope that this conversation today can inspire more and more people to become more involved in this question. So a big thanks to Monica, Benedict, NJ, who have organized this event and made their collaboration with Anyedi and with all of you yield many fruits, a millionfold in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. I'd like also to invite our incoming director, Father Anyedi Okure, to also say hello to the participants.
Hello and good evening and good morning from those in New York, etc. It's a delight to be with you. I'm glad to be part of this forum. I'm looking forward to learning a lot from you. I know especially the Philippines group has been one of the very active group on justice issues. So I'm willing, ready to learn from you, to collaborate with you, and to see how we work together to continue to advance the issue of justice by the Dominican families in the Philippines and across the world.
Thank you very much, Anyedi, also for your words. And as you all know, our talk for today is Let's Talk Climate Crisis, the Case of the Philippines. Today, we will hear from our partners in the Philippines who are working together to advocate for peace, for justice, and for the care of the environment. So we are very happy to have with us today a very strong panel. Father Napoleon Sipalay, OP, Prior Provincial of the Dominican Friars in the Philippines. We also have Sister Teresa Dagdag from the Maryknoll Sisters of St. Dominic, who's also the Dominican Sisters International Justice and Peace Promoter for Asia Pacific, and who is joining us today from the US. We also have Father Victor Calvo, who heads the Dominican Family for Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation network in the country. And finally, we have Assistant Professor Froilan Alipao of the University of Santo Tomas. So welcome all four of you, and thank you for accepting our invitation for today. And for all participants, I just want to let you know that if you have any questions for our panelists, you can address them through the chat box. And at the end of the talk, we will have some time to ask them some of these very interesting questions that I'm sure you will have. So now to really get started off with this conversation, I would like to address this first question to Father Napoleon. Father, you are the Prior Provincial of the Philippines. Can you tell us how you are doing in the Philippines and tell us about the work of Dominicans in the country?
Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Father Mike and Father Anyedi. I appreciate your recognition that we're doing something for the issue of justice and peace and care of creation. But to be honest, I'm very new into this area. I entered the office in 2016, and I am not in any formal training on the concern of climate change, which later Pope Francis called climate emergency. I was fortunate to be invited into forums. The Urgent Initiative, this is a network of several advocates on environmental concerns, especially on climate change in the Philippines. The convener of this is Bishop Roderick Pabilio, with the help of Sanyo and Father Pete Montilla. They are advocates of this area in the Philippines. And the Dominican family, especially we had the gathering of the Justice and Peace and Care for Creation, the training that we had last 2019 under the UN mechanism. I would like to thank Father Mike Dib and Lawrence. We had a training there in Iloilo, participated by many of our Dominican family, and also collaborators from the different sectors of those who are advocates of justice and peace and care for creation. And in that training in 2019, we formed 3 committees, and one of that committees is the Dominican Family Environment Committee. I would say that we had only one life term, no, when we had it last 2019 and in this year, but we realized that the issue of climate change doesn't stop, no? So we continue the life of the committee. So I may say that we are relatively new in this advocacy for climate change, but many of our institutions, especially our universities and schools, we have our retreat houses very close to this concern of environment. Our parishes or shrines have been involved in advocacy for care of creation. I remember when we were novices back in 1990, we had this priest who finished his studies in the US and he came back in the novitiate and it was attached to the shrine and they were developing a kind of pathwalk. And part of that development was to cut off many trees. And he was so concerned not to cut off those trees because, you know, some Filipinos would like to be spared from the heat of the sun and maybe heavy rain, so they have to cut those trees. But he prevailed, no, to take care of the trees. When we studied in 1990 for our philosophy, one of the studies made by our student brothers was the environmental ethics. And it was based on the thoughts of Meister Eckhart. And if you look into the different campuses we have, one of our campuses down south, they even receive a recognition from the government for the care of creation. So even in our general chapter acts, when I review it, every general provincial chapter, like the one of 2016, we already have these acts on environmental care. Last time we had the care for creation in terms of transforming our sources of energy. That's why it came out that our provincialate now, part of it is under solar power. I hope that we can multiply that in our different institutions. Looking to the bigger picture in the Philippines, I could say that our country is always either number 1 or number 2 in terms of destructive effects of climate change. We don't have to go far. We remember the Haiyan typhoon, or the local name we had, the Yolanda super typhoon that devastated Philippines in 2013. You know, I remember in the training in the urgent initiative, when the ice in the North Pole would start really to melt, the water would become more dark or more blue. And the effect of that, if there's more ice, it will deflect the heat, no, back to the atmosphere. But when the water becomes so dark, it absorbs the heat and it reacts with the atmosphere. That's why many of these typhoons will be coming from this part of the world. And the increase of temperature will not be reduced by 2 degrees in 2030. Many of the parts of this world would be underwater, and Philippines is not exempted from that. So looking at the Philippines as we rank, no, 5th in the Global Climate Risk Index of German Watch from period 1994 to 2014. In this 2020, we are number 2 in terms of ranking of this Global Climate Risk Index. It analyzes to what extent countries and regions have been affected by impacts of weather related by storms, floods, heat waves, etc. And the sectors affected by this ecological change, especially here in the Philippines, are agriculture, fisheries, water resource management. When we had the National Congress of Ecological Ministers and Promoters of Justice and Peace in terms of climate change in 2019, there was a study made. If these waters now in the Philippines would not be taken care of, in 2050, would be running out of fish to catch in our Philippine Sea. And that's why in 2019, July, the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines issued a pastoral letter on climate emergency and calling all Filipinos, 13-point agenda, to reduce the heat, not to increase the 2 degrees Celsius by 2030. The 2009 was 11 years. Now we have only 10 years. So the impact of this climate change is so much felt, by the mentioned sectors in our country in finding their livelihood, and many of them are poor. And it really echoes the letter of the Pope, Laudato Si that the cry of the earth, the cry of the poor. But if you look into the laws in the Philippines, you'll be surprised. All our laws are in place. No? We have this Climate Change Commission. We have this National Disaster Risk Reduction Management. We have this National Framework Strategy Climate Change. And we have this issuance of National Climate Change Action Plan. And all of them are submitted in the United Nations. And I know we submitted this in 2015. But at the end of this report, it says there, this could only be possible if we can get support from those bigger countries who are pollutants. That means to say, if there's no support, all these things will just be in paper. And we can see that in the recent effect of these typhoons that we have this year. In terms of mitigation, Philippines intends to undergo carbon emission reduction of 70% by 2030. This reduction will come from energy, transport, waste, forestry, and industry sectors. In terms of adoption, Philippines strives to ensure that climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction are mainstream and integrated into the country's plans and programs in all levels. The means of the implementation of this ecological concern for climate change will involve public financing, as I said a while ago, no? But if you don't have this public financing, I don't know how will these laws be really realized. So external assistance will be sought in order to appropriate the technologies to respond to this climate change. So looking at the positive side, the laws in Philippines are in place. Private sectors, as I said, no, I have seen that in urgent initiatives. There's so many sectors, no? The zero waste management, the Greenpeace, so many WWF, so many advocacies, no, or networks in Philippines are working on this. Both the government and the private sectors. And the approach of climate mitigation adaptations are priorities until 2030. But this could be undermined by the fact that Philippines ranked this year second in terms of the effects of climate change in the world. As I said, there's a need for public financing to assure success of the climate change programs. And new technologies must be acquired rather, or else the effectiveness of the program will be carried out. You know, in the different seminars we conducted, we realized people don't support this issue on climate change because they are not aware. I mean, I have to be honest, myself was like that, no? Before I joined all this training, and even in our Dominican Family Environment Committee, we undergo our training in terms of education, capacity building. If people don't really understand, they're not aware. I believe we had this survey in the recent survey from our group from Geneva. Of our many schools, only 7 responded. And all these 7, most of them are the ones who have programs in their schools. But I doubt if others have their programs. So if we are not able to raise this awareness, especially we'll start with our Dominicans in the Philippines, this program won't be supported, no, from our very backyard. So looking at the Dominican province of the Philippines, we have our 4 priorities. We have this education and social communication. We have theological reflection, justice and peace, and mission. And justice and peace, that's where we carry our issue on climate change. There are around 137 priests. Some are information, around 66 student brothers. And we have so many congregations of sisters, 19 of them are active, 2 contemplative nuns, more than 1,000 lay Dominicans, and more than 10 chapters of fraternities of priests. And we have collaborators in our school. If we can really maximize the influence, no, of all these stakeholders in our different institutions, I hope we can have this training on raising this awareness in terms of climate change. Many of our schools are really into this. As I said, we have our extension services, our different community services. They really involve this in terms of curricula of the students in the training. But I hope this could really be trickled down, not only in our big universities, but in many of our Dominican schools. The Dominican Committee for Environment, because of the lockdown, we could not continue with our program. We had our program for advocacy, capacity building, especially on education. So we were able to harness the virtual technology, and I'm thankful that the Dominican Committee for Environmental Concern, we were able to run many programs in terms of promoting this consciousness for the past months, especially on the webinars on Laudato Si. And recently we had the program for the Fratelli Tutti. And my hope is, I hope our Dominican family are in the global picture. Those advocates of climate change will help us, no? to really raise this awareness. Because the more people are aware of the impact of this climate change, the thing that really struck me when I was having this program with urgent initiative with the Dominican Committee for Environment, I realized, if you have this fever, normally our body temperature in Philippines, we measure by degrees Celsius. If you have 37 degrees Celsius, and if you raise this temperature by 2 degrees, we'll have fever all the time. And if the world will have this 2 degrees increase and it cannot be stopped, the whole world will have fever all the time, no? And we even had a training last time. If the water will really melt and it will rise 9 meters above sea level, and there was this kind of a sample, if all these islands would be covered, so many lands in Philippines would disappear. I think in the whole world, not only the Philippines, no? So I think this call for climate concern is very important, not only in Philippines, but in the whole world. And I hope we can rally all our Dominicans to support us in this endeavor. And our chapter is coming this January 2021. I hope this would be really a concern that we would really discuss, no? The direction we will take as a province, as the Dominican family in the future. So thank you very much, Monica.
Thank you, Father, very much. It's very interesting what you've shared about, especially, I don't know, how advocacy engagement, even when the environmental committee is new, but the institutions have been very involved in this matter since a very long time ago. And also the impact of the climate crisis that is so broad in the country, and that it has very alarming consequences. So formation is really needed, awareness, advocacy. So in this line, I would like to ask now Professor Froilan, how would you describe the particular environmental situation in the Philippines? And also, what are the possible effects of climate change in your country?
Good evening, Monica.
Hi.
And good evening to all organizers of this series for the Dominican, particularly for the situations of environment here in our country, the Philippines. It is also my privilege to talk with you, to all these participants and those who are going also to view the recording of this activity later in the future. So it is my privilege to share with you these situations. So I have a presentation. So the question about the description of the environment here in the Philippines. The pandemic is so timely in describing the environmental position of the country in response to climate change. Its emancipation was rooted in disrupted ecology, which is either brought by human greed for knowledge or simply greed per se. Similarly, the rampant deforestation, land use and shift, and urban poor planning have brought the country to devastation, especially during natural calamities. And this is even worsens the conditions of the less privileged, as they are the major hit of the situation. We do not want to discount the attempts of every nation to attain the Sustainable Development Goals, which advocacy to end poverty, protect the planet, and promote peace and prosperity. But this advocacy should not be guided by the dominant neoliberalism that will only direct the uncontrolled devastation of the environment to make believe global development. Here in our country, we observe that they are intensified by wrongdoings and law breakings. The success or failure of humanity is embedded in its norms and values. As we continue to divert our lives into development, these values are sluggishly taken for granted, hence multiple law breaking and transgressions have proliferated. There are policies regulated by government which favors subsidiaries that is too neoliberal in nature, pro-foreign, pro-business, and anti-environment, and even anti-people. There's no surprise to many since they have cited historical influential few who accumulated their wealth from environmental destructions. Their business include environment encroaching sectors such as real estate, construction of food and drinks, ports development, manufacturing, power, energy, water, oil, telecommunications, mining, and agribusiness. Dominating both economic and political structures in the society leaves the poor the poorest. The poor take the impact of critically ill and hugely degraded environment. At the same time, they have no capability in competing against tycoons and businesses. We have also a lot of deforestations and massive land conversion. Disruptions of ecological balances as deforestation and land conversion may lead to emergence of pathogens that is deadly like coronavirus and soil erosion. In 2015 alone, there was 23.3% of the country's forest and land was converted to corporate plantation and mining, which is unhealthy and critical considering the country's geography and terrain that we should maintain 54% forest cover, according to environmental scientists. Some of the land conversions as follows. First, there were allocations of 1 million hectares of oil palm plantation, and 98% of which are in Mindanao alone. Second, there is an ongoing build infrastructures projects. Case in point are the dam projects nationwide, 6 of which under loans with China, which threaten to destroy farm, forest, and water sources and displace communities and livelihoods. And it resulted to loss of ecological integrity. There's a promotion of dirty industries like large-scale mining, disregarded ecological integrity. Large-scale mining entails cheap methods that spell deforestation, slope destabilization, soil erosion, water resource degradation, desertification, damages, siltation and alteration of terrain, and sea bottom topography, and it leads to increased water turbidity and air pollution. Hence, equated with environmental destructions and the preference of dirty fuel is a major source of air pollution and coal for energy development. 11 of 49 current committed power plant projects are coal-fired, accounting for 78% of combined rated capacity. Clear evidence of violations across environmental, human, and even sovereign rights. Then there is heavy reliance on coal, the dirtiest fossil fuel in a major air pollution. We are also experiencing urbanization and poverty. Feeble rural development blinded the people that Mega Manila provides livelihood, and we experience congested urban areas produce poverty and diseases instead of growth. A space that can only hold one person is usually shared by more. This has been challenged during the enhanced community quarantine, or ECQ, when physical distancing was strictly implemented. 29% of the families are cramped in spaces that allow only 4 square meters and below per person, which is below the World Health Organization standard. Also, the health advice of frequent hand washing and dispensing surroundings is a huge challenge where only a little over half of families have water pipe into their dwellings and 24% source water from protected wells since out of 4 residents is an informal settler. Pollution is also a problem, and the region is not only the worst traffic on earth, as the navigational app Waze once said, and the most congested, but the world's cities with poorest air quality. Philippines ranks third among countries with the highest incidence of deaths related to outdoor air pollution. We are experiencing climate change disasters. The green gas emissions have increased from 2007 to 2017 due to the country's continued use of oil and increasing reliance on coal. The Philippine contribution to the climate crisis is minuscule compared to the accountability of transnational corporations in the industrial countries. Yet the injustice still lies in the fact the country is among the most vulnerable to climate disasters. The Philippines is the fifth most affected country by climate disasters from 1998 to 2017. That is according to the Climate Risk Index of 2019. And we have so much of anti-environment policy while we are experiencing vulnerabilities due to climate hazards. The impaired state of the environment is a direct result of decades of Philippine government legislation that prioritizes foreign investment and trade anchored to environmentally destructive premises. On the other hand, these neoliberal policies have entailed the demolition of slums and the urban poor, bay reclamation and coastal displacement, land and resource grabs, including and grabbing of ancestral lands of indigenous people and displacement of farming communities. Our country has seen private interests taking over Philippine resources, utilizing this profit-making and narrowing people's chances of healthy environment and living. I hope with this few minutes, with this only short privilege, I give you the whole picture of our situations, and maybe you can ask some clarifications later in our question and answer. Thank you very much. So see you later in our question and answer.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your input. Clearly, everything's connected, and all these situations that you've shared have a very big impact in the climate crisis, linked to work, access to health and sanitation, quality space to live. Yeah, it's an issue that should make us really reflect on what we're doing, and that everything is connected, of course, companies too. I was shocked about the Philippines is the fifth more affected country in climate disaster ranking. So that's, yeah, shocking. And especially when the poorest are the ones who get the worst effects on this. So thank you very much for sharing. And now I'd like to address a question to Sister Teresa. You are working tirelessly for the care of creation in the Philippines. Having worked on a report on the climate situation in the country to submit to the UN Committee on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights, can you share with us some of the main points of this report, Sister?
Thank you very much, Monica. And I want to greet you, everyone who are here participating in this webinar. As the two first speakers, Father Jun and Caporoy, as we call him, have shared with you the level of emergency, climate emergency in our country. I would like to take you to another realm where the causes have affected the IPs, the indigenous peoples. I have worked with them since 1980s, different tribes in the Cordilleras, which is a range of mountains in the north. They are about 6 or 7 ethno-linguistic groups, only among more than 100 indigenous peoples groups in the Philippines, and local Austronesian languages number about 135. So you can see that the indigenous peoples in the Philippines are all over. You have a lot of mountains. Let's imagine that if you go to these regions in the mountains or where they live, that the indigenous peoples have learned how to take care of the environment through their own ways of traditional practices. There's one, for example, in Ifugao, which is one of those ethno-linguistic groups in the Cordilleras that practices muyung. Muyung is a practice where a certain family or clan or the whole community takes care of forests and rivers, entire ecosystems. So if all of their lives, the IPs have been taking care of all of these resources, you can see how rich the natural resources would be around the areas. And there is this controversy over the land use, because the indigenous peoples consider themselves as owned by the land. So it is ancestral land, it's owned by their ancestors. And so even if they don't have any titles to it, they feel that they have to protect it and they have a right to use it, And you know that in these indigenous lands, there's a lot of rivers, mines, with mineral ores, and just riches, fresh air and all that. So come the state, the Philippine government, or any state at all, that promulgates that without titles, every land is government land. So you can see where the controversy comes in. Because if a foreign investor or even a local corporation wants to apply for the use of the river, the use of water for hydroelectric dams, then the Philippine government thinks, the state thinks that they own the land, therefore they approve the application. And this is where the controversy happens, because when the company comes in, they're supposed to have the consent of the IPs, the indigenous peoples. And most of the time, there is a misunderstanding or even lack of understanding of what the FPIC means. FPIC is free, prior, informed consent. It is a specific right that pertains to indigenous peoples and is recognized by the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And it allows them to give or withhold consent to a project which may affect them in their territories. So here we have the IPs on the one hand, trying to safeguard, protect, enhance, develop their ancestral domain. And then on the other hand, the state, which feels that it has the right to exploit, use all of these natural resources for development. And the corporations that come in are required to have a consultation. But the consultations themselves are not adequate. Why do I say that? Because they think that if they gather the people together in a meeting, they think that the permission is granted. A consultation is a consultation, and the people have a right to say no. So in that sense, when the people say no, many times they are not recognized because there would be security forces, there will be intimidation, there would be red tagging. So from the communities, I'd just like to name a few things that have been mentioned as problems. I have mentioned harassment, So if the local community, the indigenous community say no, then there would be military presence in order to enforce the utilization, the exploitation of a particular mining project maybe, or a particular source of hydroelectric power. The continuing presence of these security forces are very precarious to the lives of the indigenous peoples who want to watch, safeguard, protect, monitor, the rights of the people and the rights to the mines, to the particular natural resources in their midst. And therefore, what happens is that there's displacement and evacuation of indigenous families. So this misconduct of the FPIC process is tantamount to a violation of human rights, the rights of the indigenous people to the land which they have safeguarded, protected, and developed. And as Kaporoy mentioned, the dams that are being planned with loans from China are already in play. They're going on. The Kaliwa Dam, for example, is a big dam. They're starting, even if they would displace the IP communities in the province of in Tanay, Rizal, Quezon, So without the FPIC process, even without it, there's heavy equipment coming into the area. There's construction, the access road to the Kaliwa Dam, despite the opposition of the indigenous people. I don't think the indigenous people can fight the military forces. So this will result in deaths of environmental defenders. And another example is in Ifugao, where they also have proponent of a 11 megawatt Tinok hydroelectric power. And again, this is contentious, and it has resulted in mortal danger of environmental human rights activities. In Benguet, another province in the Cordillera, 22 indigenous peoples, the leaders filed a petition with the regional trial court to issue temporary restraining order because this is a corporation, Baseco, wanted to build a 500 megawatt project. It's a plant, a hydroelectric plant in their locality. But the IP people, they have their own way of deciding on things. It's called pagtutungtungan. It's a meeting of their elders to decide whether they can go along with this project or not, because they know their own locality. So here we see the problem of the people, and we would like to offer some recommendations. One would be that we ask the office of the the United Nations Human Rights, the Office of the High Commissioner, to please investigate these cases in the Philippines so that there could be a recourse for appropriate remedy, so that the state could uphold the civil rights and political rights of the indigenous peoples, so that we can correct the civil society trying to be the voice of the indigenous peoples, to ensure that the Philippine government, without retaliation to the local communities and advocates, to determine the domestic mechanisms that may be pursued to correct the violations and prosecute the offenders. Thirdly, to respect and recognize and protect the FPIC, which is an institution that safeguards the rights of the indigenous people. Okay. And fourthly, to ensure the lawful, meaningful implementation of the IPRA. IPRA is the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act. And finally, in 2020, we have this Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020, which is really very difficult for us, because any activist, anybody who is suspected to be a terrorist, then terrorist means if you disagree with policies of the government, then you are subjected to imprisonment without any trial. So all of these things are really violations of human rights. I stop here. I think there are many problems in the Philippines, and we will need the support of our network in Europe, United States, and different countries to help us to press the United Nations to press our country, our state, our government officials to make sure that human rights are not violated. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sister, for sharing all this with us. I believe we have so many things to learn from our indigenous peoples. They really know about care of creation, and they do understand why this is a major issue. So maybe the key is our misunderstanding of who owns what. And it seems that we have not understood anything. So we should look more into our indigenous peoples in these matters. And it's also very sad to hear that the FPIC process is not being respected. This issue are sadly happening in other regions too. In fact, on this upcoming Monday, we will have a talk specifically on this, on business and human rights, with Father Miguel Angel Bullon in Dominican Republic. So maybe you may all also join to continue on this topic. So sister, thank you very much for your input. And now, last but of course not least, I would like to address a question to Father Vic. Father Vic, you're the Justice and Peace Promoter of the Dominican province of the Philippines and also Regional Promoter for Asia Pacific. Can you tell us briefly what other things is the Dominican Family for Justice, Peace and Care of Creation doing in the Philippines or in Asia Pacific? And what are the challenges that you're facing?
Good day, Monica. Good evening in our time zone. Good day, Father Mike and Father Anati, brothers and sisters. Thank you very much for giving us the space in the Philippines and also in the Asia Pacific to tell our story. So last August 2019, Father Mike and Lorang gave us a seminar, a workshop, a training workshop for human rights and the UN mechanism at Iloilo with the Sisters of the Holy Rosary. And it was there that the committees were formed, like the Environment Committee, which is very active right now, and we have the EJK Committee working in the human rights violation, especially on the issue of war on drugs. And we have also the Labor Committee, and you know, we have so many things to do. So practically, there are two committees who are working right now: the Environment Committee and the EJK Committee. So the human rights situation in the Philippines has gotten worse since the Duterte administration. Classic example is one of the participants in our conference in Iloilo, Sarah Alvarez. Father Mike knows her, was killed last August 17, almost exactly 1 year after the training workshop. So the human rights defenders in the Philippines have a very hard time because it has gotten worse. Systematic killings of human rights defenders, and there are issues of red tagging, labeling people as terrorists when they question the government. So right now, we are working with the EJK because it's Christmas. We are celebrating a Christmas with them tomorrow. But I heard bad news because of our work, like helping distribution of food packs, mosquito nets to those people who were victimized by the typhoons. As Father Jun have said, the cry of the earth, the cry of the poor, meaning the first and victim of environmental devastations are the poor. So one of our companion was diagnosed positive in COVID-19. So we have to have changed our plan tomorrow. Maybe we can check if I'm still, I got a negative result, but we have to double check it. So we got the testimony and written testimony, rather, of the victims. In case in the future, after the term of Duterte, they will file a case. We have some documents to use. So what happens now in the country, imagine you have a environmental issue added by typhoons, uh, two super typhoons and another typhoon right now in the Mindanao, and the COVID-19 pandemic. So we are at a loss sometimes to respond to this pressing situation. It is almost an ending struggle for us. So we have to ask why Philippines, Lord? Why us? Uh, it is a punishment for us as a people, or you have a message for us? But nevertheless, we keep on working. Like for example, the Dominican family have distributed some foods since the pandemic, and until now, they never stop distributing PPEs, uh, help to our affected brothers and sisters. And we also thank some members of the Dominican family abroad, like the one in Eastern Australia and Solomon Islands, who have sent their financial contribution to us. And of course, Pakistan, I think right now is active. Uh, they're sending me pictures and messages about their work for justice and peace there. You can help us maybe with your advocacy and prayers, some donations, um, some words of encouragement, because I think sometimes we don't know what to do with the situation in the Philippines. So maybe we can address more in the question part, Monica. So thank you very much for giving us the space, and God bless us all.
Thank you very much, Father Vic, for your sharing, and especially congratulations and thank you all for the great work you are doing on the ground, especially now with all the climate situation, typhoons and COVID, and well, everything that you've shared, of course. Well, now to close up this part of the conversation, I would like to ask Father Napoleon, would you like to make a very short final comment or remark?
Yeah, thank you again, Monica, and our brothers and sisters here. I think the words spoken by Sister Teresa, Kaproy, Father B, spoke so much of the complexity of the issue. But I think the hope that we have seen for these past months, we thought when we had the training of Salamanca on March of this year, and right after the training, it ended on March 13. The whole country was in lockdown. So all of us, because we were exposed to some participants from Italy, I think some of them are here. We were advised to go for quarantine And we thought, I think better to keep away for the situation that we will not be carrying the virus around. But after 14 days, we asked ourselves, what can we do? We cannot simply isolate ourselves from the reality of what is happening in the midst. So we thought at first of providing something for, because many doctors and nurses died at the time. So I think Father Vic was able to gather resources that the one who was making the uniform for the basketball players made it into PPE, no? Protective personal equipment. And we realized, no, later it snowballed into people helping us, providing food for those who were locked down. We thought all the while that we cannot do anything. And with this social media, I think we even had a concert to gather resources for the Dominican family, especially to help those who are affected by this present pandemic. And later it evolved into the help for those who are affected by the typhoons, especially these two typhoons we had for these past days. So we thought we cannot do anything, but when we are together, we share whatever we have. We're able to multiply, no? the few loaves and few fish. So thank you for sharing and giving us this space. I know the concern is not going to end. No? It will stay with us. But what is important, we have each other to encourage us, to help us continue with this advocacy. And thank you very much for the Dominicans, no? For Justice and Peace in Geneva and this forum to allow us to express our concerns, especially for climate emergency here in the Philippines. Thank you. So we invite everyone to share whatever you can, no? Encourage us, help us in this endeavor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Father, and thank you very much to our 4 panelists of today. You did very touching and moving sharing during this conversation, and it was indeed very informative also. For those participants who might have questions, it's your time now to post them in the chat box. We do have a first question from Christopher. He says, thank you so much for taking interest in our situation here in the Philippines. Our environmental issues are very complex. I think one of the ways to safeguard the environment is to develop localized stewardship by forming the local inhabitants. Do we have, as Dominicans, a kind of modular training program that encompasses crucial areas in the current environmental issues, like spiritual, political, economic, etc.? The question is not addressed to a specific panelist, so would like to
Monica, can I share what we have done so far?
Of course.
Thank you for asking that question, Father Christopher. No? I know our reach is not that much, but the committee that was formed had this all in mind, the program for awareness, capacity building. We thought we start with the major superiors, but when we had it organized, the lockdown came. So we're able to go for the social media in terms of promoting the thoughts of Laudato Si, and later we had still seminars during the season of creation, and we're very thankful that Benedict, no, of the group in Geneva, is going to help us in the future for this awareness raising in our different Dominican schools, not only the friars but the sisters. So we look forward in the future that this awareness program would be carried out in our different schools, and I hope the committee can really spearhead in terms of making this a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Father. Philip is texting us regarding the Living Laudato Si Philippines, the interfaith movement initiated by Catholic lay people, and that has partnered with the UniHarmony Partners Manila. And well, he explains a little bit the context. And he's asking us, considering that the Dominican order family has various educational institutions, I'm wondering if the order is active in promoting such advocacy. Maybe Father Vic, would you like to address?
Yeah, may I answer?
Or yeah,
in the
Yeah, okay.
Monica, I'd just like to say, in the provincial council level, we made a decision to divest ourselves of the investment in coal, open pit mining.
Okay.
And we signed up with the advocacy of the Association for Major Religious Superiors for the divestment of our funds in terms of open pit mining. But our schools are still about to enter into this picture. They haven't gone into this, I think, yet.
Thank you, Father. Okay. Yeah, Sister Teresa, would you like to add something? Sister Teresa, you're muted.
Okay. Yeah. But yes, in terms of addressing environmental issues, the Marinol Sisters, Marinol Dominicans in Baguio have a Marinol Ecological Sanctuary, and their two-pronged approach actually, it's on educational, ecological education in terms of addressing, the pollution, solid waste management, climate crisis, and all that. But the other part is really the cosmic and the spiritual aspect of why we need to take care of our common home, the spirituality of a one earth community that serves to strengthen our commitment to protection of the environment and to reverse the effects of environmental crisis. So I think that there are different ways of addressing the environmental issue in the Philippines. We started as Marinol Sisters actually since the earthquake, the killer earthquake in Baguio struck, killing hundreds of people there because the soil is very unstable. Baguio is a center of mining activities. That's why you have the Cannon Road. It was the Americans who came there and discovered there were gold and other minerals. So the land is very unstable. And therefore, with the earthquake, we have learned how to help people get ourselves educated, learn more about the issues so that we can be part of the advocacy, the campaign for caring for the environment. And that's growing, that's all over the world too. So with the Dominicans, our environment committee, we're trying to look at how we can spread our influence and enhance this earth-human relationship so that we don't destroy, but rather to take care. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister. In fact, you may help us answer also the last question we have. Dina is asking
Monica?
us. Yes?
Can I add something? Are we addressing the second question?
Yes.
The Laudato Si Philippines matter?
Yes.
Yeah. Our office, the UST Simbayan Community Development Office, is a member of the Laudato Si schools. So that was also organized by the Living Laudato Si Philippines. So not only in the UniHarmony Partners Manila, but we already organized the coalition of a major Catholic universities like Ateneo de Manila, UST, University of Santo Tomas, De La Salle University, and other Catholic colleges. So we already form ourselves into Laudato Si schools. So now we are trying to discuss the different issues like water, land, waste management. So we have several leveling of meetings so that the result of those meetings were already we are advocating the results of the meeting to our respective universities and offices. No? But the challenge that we realize during our conversation, our respective offices in our respective universities, we can easily adopt the program. But the challenge is our respective institutions are not open or not really aware on the urgency of putting up a programs in line with Laudato Si. So despite of that we are Catholic universities, there's no conscious effort to really integrate Laudato Si in our systems, structures, and policies. So that's the challenge, no? How to really live the challenges of Laudato Si in our respective institutions. So in our respective offices, like community extension and community development, we can adapt the program we can develop. But the challenge now for the whole respective Catholic universities and institutions, that would be another question. So I think the Dominican family should also address the concerns of strengthening the programs in our respective educational institutions, and in particular, and to the congregations in general. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Um, uh, well, maybe this last question, maybe Father Mike, maybe you can help us answer. How can the Justice and Peace and Care Creation as an organization change possibly the outlook to address the ways of industries and corporations, particularly those subsidized by the government in doing business in such manner that they can lessen their carbon emissions, which for all we know affect the overall climate crisis scenario, not only the Philippines, but all over the world?
So I think that the first way to do it is to build strong movements of people who will be engaging with those companies which are doing this. And of course, many of them, if not most of them, will not be very open to any such discussion. So it's going to involve quite a lot of struggle to get them even to get to the table to talk about it. But this is where the connection between people on the ground and us in Geneva and other UN centers becomes crucial, because we have to adopt this from a multi-perspective, multi-side perspective. We can advocate for this in the UN context there's a big move at the moment to develop a treaty to regulate the operation of such corporations who are doing this. And that's a struggle to get to a point where this treaty will become active. But we are engaged at that level, and we need more and more examples of struggles on the ground and what people are doing on the ground to address them and where the obstacles lie, because we can hopefully use that information to bring into what this treaty should be, the way it should come out. So those are just some of the ways to do it.
Monica, may I add to that?
Of course, sister.
In the Philippines, I attended national consultation for carbon neutrality by 2050. Okay, and it was sponsored by Green Convergence. Green Convergence is it's actually a network of people who are concerned about environment, about safe food, and one of the speakers who was there was a businessman. His name is Federico Lopez, and he is very convinced that business should change their ways so that they can be environmental friendly, because it doesn't help the businesses to be destroying and to be exploiting natural resources, but it will help them if they're aware and they can contribute to the overall well-being of the planet. Like you have people, you have planet, and you have profit, and the profit will not come if you destroy the environment. So it's the wise use, the sustainable use of resources that some of the business companies in the Philippines are waking up to. They're becoming more aware that they can do something about it. This is just one example, but this is a very hopeful example of business people thinking differently outside the box of just profit-oriented businesses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sister. And thank you very much to all of our 4 amazing panelists today. And on behalf of the delegation, I want to thank you all for joining this conversation. I'd just like to take a very little moment to make 2 announcements. The first one, I'd like to remind you that our next conversation will be on business and human rights, the case of evictions in Dominican Republic. This will be this upcoming Monday, December 21st at 3 p.m. European Central Time, 10 p.m. in the Philippines, 10 a.m. in Dominican Republic. Also to let you know, and especially to invite you to share this in your circles, that in the delegation's website, that's un.op.org, we have a donation box. Those funds will really help us to continue the advocacy work. So if you can spread the word, we will be very thankful. And thank you very much. We hope to see you very soon. And I'll leave you again with our video of the delegation.
Benedicere, predicare, laudare, we praise our Lord with our saints. Benedicere, we lift our voice in song. Predicare, we proclaim your word to the world. Laudare, benedicere, predicare. Sent out to preach by Dominic, sent 2 by 2 to all the world, sent out to study the gospel of grace, to find new ways to preach.
Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you for all your preparation. All your preparation.
Congratulations.
Yeah.